There were 47 agents working this case, 14 months of surveillance, 3 countries involved, and the whole operation almost collapsed. Not because of a leak, not because of a double agent, not because of anything sophisticated. It collapsed because of a receipt. A single $14 transaction at a gas station in suburban Ohio made at 2:17 in the morning by a man who believed, with everything he had, that he was invisible. That he had built something that couldn't be touched. That he had thought of everything. He hadn't thought of the coffee. This is the story of how one of the most elaborate financial fraud networks operating in the United States came within hours of walking away clean, and how the only thing that stopped them was a mistake so small, so completely ordinary, that when investigators finally saw it, they didn't celebrate. They just stared at it. Because they couldn't believe that was it. That after everything, 14 months of warrants, subpoenas, international cooperation, burned resources, dead ends, and courtroom-ready architecture, that was the crack. A convenience store transaction at 2 in the morning from a man who should have been asleep. But here's what nobody tells you about these cases. The crack was never really about the coffee. The coffee was just the moment it became visible. The real crack had been forming for over a year, slowly, invisibly, in the one place no surveillance camera can reach. Inside the mind of someone who had convinced himself that control was the same thing as safety. And it almost was. Almost. Let's go back to where this actually started. March 2021, a mid-sized regional bank in Pittsburgh. A compliance officer, 11 years on the job, the kind of professional who had seen enough irregular patterns to develop what she would later describe in testimony as a texture sense for financial anomaly, is running a routine sweep. The kind of review that happens thousands of times a day at financial institutions across the country. The kind that almost never finds anything interesting. She pulls up a cluster of business accounts flagged by the bank's automated monitoring system. The flag itself is not dramatic. It's a soft alert. Not a violation, not a confirmed irregularity, just a statistical deviation. A cluster of accounts showing deposit patterns that the algorithm found unusual enough to surface. She opens the transaction logs, lays them out side by side on her screen. The amounts are different across the accounts. The businesses are different. Different names, different industries, different registered addresses across 3 states. On the surface, nothing connects them. But she isn't looking at the surface. She's looking at the rhythm. And the rhythm is the same. Not similar. The same. The timing of deposits, the cadence of transfers, the spacing between activity windows, it moves like a single heartbeat across 23 separate entities. She had seen organic business activity her entire career. She knew what it looked like. Irregular, human, shaped by real-world events and decisions. What she was looking at was not organic, it was synchronized. And synchronized financial behavior across entities that have no apparent relationship means one thing. There is a relationship. You just haven't found it yet. She escalated. A financial crimes unit picked it up. And within 2 weeks, what looked like a handful of suspicious accounts became something fundamentally different. 23 shell companies, 6 states. Estimated cash flow in the range of $40 million over 30 months. And at the absolute center of it, a void. No name, no face, just infrastructure. Whoever built this had done it carefully, methodically, and with a sophistication that immediately changed the tone of the investigation. This wasn't a small-time operator running a simple scheme. This was architecture. Someone had sat down and engineered this. And they had done it well. To understand why the investigation took as long as it did, you have to understand what investigators were actually dealing with. The network had been designed to exploit one of the most persistent structural vulnerabilities in the American banking system: the gap between transactions that trigger mandatory reporting and those that don't. The Bank Secrecy Act requires financial institutions to file currency transaction reports on cash transactions above $10,000. Every operator in financial crime knows this number. Amateur operations simply stay under it. They deposit $9,500 at a time and think they're invisible. They're not. Regulators have seen that pattern for decades. What this network did was fundamentally different. Instead of operating under the threshold on individual accounts, It distributed activity across so many accounts and entities that no single transaction, no single account, and no single institution ever held enough of the picture to trigger concern. The deposits were sized not to stay under a threshold but to look natural, irregular enough to mimic real business activity, varied enough to avoid pattern matching but collectively, when mapped, absolutely deliberate. It was a statistical camouflage. And it worked because the data needed to see through it existed across multiple banks, multiple states, and multiple regulatory jurisdictions simultaneously. No one institution had the full picture. And financial regulators, for all their sophistication, still largely investigate within institutional boundaries. The team assembled to work it. A joint task force pulling from the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, and IRS Criminal Investigation, understood immediately that the first and most critical challenge was data aggregation. Before they could identify anyone, before they could build a case, before they could even confirm the full scope of the network, they needed to build the map. And building the map meant months of subpoenas, cross-referencing, and legal coordination across multiple jurisdictions, some of which required international legal assistance requests that moved at the speed of bureaucracy rather than the speed of investigation. For 3 months, the task force built the map. Account openings, registered agent addresses, many of which resolved to commercial registered agent services that held hundreds of unrelated entities and offered zero useful information. Business filings across 22 states. Corporate documents that were technically compliant but structurally hollow. Websites for the shell companies that had been professionally built, professionally maintained, and listed services that were plausible but unverifiable. Some of the entities even had online reviews, not many and not recent, but enough to pass a surface-level credibility check. This level of preparation is not accidental. It reflects a specific operational philosophy. If every individual component of your network can survive scrutiny in isolation, the network becomes nearly invisible unless someone has both the resources and the mandate to examine all of it simultaneously. The person who built this understood that investigations have resource constraints. They understood that the more friction you build into the process of following the money, the more likely an investigation is to stall, deprioritize, or simply run out of authorized budget before it reaches anything useful. And for a long time, that strategy was working. 8 months into the investigation, something shifted. A data analyst on the task force, a woman named Priya, who had spent 6 years working in financial intelligence at Swift before moving into federal service, had been quietly running a different kind of analysis, not following the money in the conventional sense. Instead, she had been mapping the timing relationships between transactions across the entire network. Not what moved, but when. And after 8 months of data, a structure emerged from the timing that the surface-level analysis had completely missed. 12 accounts. Out of the 23 entities and their associated financial infrastructure, 12 specific accounts appeared consistently at the inflection points of the network's activity. They weren't always the largest accounts. They weren't always the most active. But whenever a significant sum was about to exit the network entirely, whenever money moved from the shell infrastructure into what investigators presumed to be the final destination, the beneficiary, it passed through one of these 12 accounts first. Every time. Without exception. Priya's conclusion was that these 12 accounts functioned as the control layer, the clearing nodes. They were the mechanism by which someone, one person or a small group, maintained oversight of the entire network. You could run the lower-level entities on automation, but before money left, it touched the control layer. And whoever touched the control layer touched everything. The investigation pivoted. For the next 2 months, the task force focused entirely on tracing the beneficial ownership of those 12 accounts. This was, in legal terms, the hardest part of the entire operation. The accounts were held by entities that were themselves held by other entities. Delaware LLCs, chosen specifically because Delaware does not require disclosure of beneficial owners' information documents. A Luxembourg subsidiary that sat behind 2 layers of nominee directorship. A dormant UK limited company that hadn't filed active accounts in 4 years and existed, as far as anyone could tell, solely to hold a name in a corporate registry. Every step of the trail was technically legal, Every document was technically filed, but none of it was designed to be found by a human being. It was designed to be found by someone who stopped looking before the last layer. International legal assistance requests went out to Luxembourg and the United Kingdom. They took time. One of the Luxembourg requests had to be resubmitted due to a technical deficiency in the original documentation. A 2-week delay that the prosecutor on the case later described with considerable restraint as frustrating. But the requests eventually bore results. And 10 months into the investigation, the beneficial ownership trail resolved. Past the Delaware LLC, past the Luxembourg subsidiary, past the dormant UK company, to a name. A real person. A 41-year-old man living in a suburb outside Columbus, Ohio. No criminal record. No prior contact with federal law enforcement. Owned and operated a small but legitimate management consulting firm that generated real revenue and filed accurate tax returns. Had a mortgage. Had kids in school. Coached soccer on Saturdays. Was, in every external dimension, a completely unremarkable member of the American professional class. And this is where things get dangerous, because this could happen to anyone who gets comfortable believing that their paper distance from something is the same as real distance. He had spent years building layers between himself and the network. And for a long time, those layers held. But layers are only as strong as the person maintaining them. And people under pressure make decisions that layers can't protect them from. The task force moved into what investigators call the evidence consolidation phase, the process of converting what they knew into what they could prove beyond a reasonable doubt in a federal courtroom. And this is where the case developed a problem that the lead prosecutor, a former DOJ financial crimes attorney with 17 years of experience, was honest about from the beginning. Knowing who built something and proving it in court are not the same challenge. The beneficial ownership documentation linked the defendant to the entities. But beneficial ownership of a company that is linked through a chain of transactions to a fraud network is not the same as direct participation in the fraud. A skilled defense team, and at this level of case you always face a skilled defense team, would argue that the structural connection was real but that the defendant's role was ambiguous, that the entities could have been created for legitimate purposes, that the fraudulent activity could have been conducted by someone else using the same infrastructure without the defendant's knowledge or direct involvement, that the evidence was circumstantial, multi-layered, and interpretable in more than one way. The lead prosecutor wanted something direct, something that placed this specific man in contact with the specific mechanism of the fraud at a specific identifiable moment. Not a paper trail with ambiguous interpretive possibilities. A behavioral link. Evidence that said, on this date, at this time, in this location, he touched it personally. Surveillance authorization was obtained. The task force expanded its coverage. And for 6 weeks, nothing happened that changed the evidentiary picture. The man's routine was remarkably consistent. He worked. He attended his children's school events. He had dinner at the same Italian restaurant on Friday evenings, the kind of place with the same server every week and a standing reservation. He exercised. He mowed his lawn on Sunday mornings. He did not in any observable way behave like someone managing a $40 million fraud infrastructure. This was not surprising to the more experienced investigators on the task force. Sophisticated operators at this level typically build systems that are designed to run without constant intervention. The automation handles the routine activity. The structural redundancy absorbs minor disruptions. The operator doesn't need to log in daily, doesn't need to actively manage. The whole point of building something this carefully is that you can step away from it and let it breathe. And the longer you step away, the safer you are. Distance is the product. The system is the distance machine, but distance has a single, unavoidable vulnerability. And every investigator who has spent significant time on cases like this knows what it is. Automation requires maintenance. Systems require updates. And at some point, not every day, not even every month, but at some point, something breaks or flags or needs a human decision. And when that moment comes, the operator has to make a choice. Stay away and let it sit, or reach in and fix it. Most of the time, staying away is the rational choice. But rational choices and human instincts are different things, especially when what you're protecting has cost you years of careful work and represents everything you've built. 3 weeks into the expanded surveillance operation at 2:09 in the morning on a Tuesday in November, a monitoring alert was generated by a passive system the task force had placed on the network's financial infrastructure. One of the 12 clearing accounts, one of the accounts at the center of Priya's control layer identification, had attempted a transaction that failed. A routine automated transfer, part of the network's regular operational cycle, had encountered an error condition and aborted. The error was logged. The system flagged it, and somewhere an alert was sent. The task force's monitoring system captured what happened next with a precision that investigators would later describe as almost uncomfortable. At 2:15 a.m., 6 minutes after the error was generated, a login event was recorded on a VPN endpoint that the task force had been passively monitoring for 3 weeks. The endpoint was a commercial VPN service, the kind available to anyone for a few dollars a month. The login lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds. During that window, a configuration file within one of the network's automated management systems was accessed and modified. The modification was small, a single parameter adjustment that cleared the error condition and reset the failed transaction to retry successfully. Then the session closed, clean, brief, controlled. At 2:17 a.m., 2 minutes after the VPN session ended, a debit card transaction registered at a Shell station on Morse Road in Columbus, Ohio. $14.31, fuel, 1 black coffee. The card was registered to a prepaid account that the task force had never encountered. It was not connected to any entity in their map. It appeared on its surface to be entirely unrelated to the case, a disposable financial instrument of the kind used by millions of Americans for privacy or convenience, with no inherent connection to anything under investigation. But the timing was 17 minutes. From the system error to the VPN login to the configuration fix to the gas station transaction, 17 minutes. And in financial investigation, temporal clustering of this density between a control layer event and a physical location transaction does not happen by coincidence. It happens because one person was involved in both events. Because the same person who sat down at a screen at 2:15 in the morning to fix a system error was standing at a pump at 2:17, and the 2-minute gap was driving time. The task force moved on it immediately. A court order for the gas station's security footage was obtained within 48 hours. When the footage came back, slightly grainy, the way convenience store cameras always are, but clear enough, there was no ambiguity. The man from the Columbus suburb, standing at pump number 4, in a gray jacket with a specific logo on the left chest that he had been photographed wearing 3 days earlier. Alone, in the middle of the night, buying fuel and a coffee. The VPN exit node location data was cross-referenced. The node resolved to a geographic area consistent with the gas station's location, within a 3-mile radius, the margin attributable to normal VPN exit routing variability. Consistent, not conclusive on its own, but consistent. The prepaid card was traced. This is where the case moved from strong to overwhelming. The card connected to a device, a secondary phone, a model different from the one registered in the defendant's name, the kind of device you buy for operational separation. The device connected to an email account created 6 months earlier under a name that bore no relationship to the defendant. And the email account contained what investigators would later describe in the arrest warrant affidavit as extensive correspondence relating to the management and operational administration of the fraud network, including communications that referenced specific transactions, specific entities, and specific decisions in terms that no person without direct knowledge and direct involvement could have written. He had built an entire secondary identity for his operational communications. He had used a separate device. He had routed his access through a commercial VPN. He had used a prepaid card that was not connected to his documented financial profile. He had, in other words, done almost everything right. Almost everything. He had gone out at 2 a.m. to fix something that could have waited until morning. He had stopped for gas and coffee on the way back. And he had paid with the one card that connected to the one device that connected to the one email account that connected to everything. $14.31. The arrest came 9 days later, executed in the early morning outside the consulting firm's office building before he reached the door. He was, by all accounts, completely calm when the agents approached, which, in retrospect, makes sense. He had to have known, at some level, that this was always how it ended. You don't build something this carefully without understanding, somewhere in the back of your mind, that careful is not the same as permanent. Now step back. Step all the way back. Because the outcome of this case, guilty on 11 counts, convicted in federal court, sentenced to 12 years, is only the surface of what makes it worth examining. What sits underneath the outcome is something more uncomfortable and more universal. This man was not caught because he was careless. He was not caught because he was arrogant or stupid, or made the kind of obvious mistake that fills simpler fraud prosecutions. He was caught because he was human. Because he had invested so deeply in something that when a small part of it flickered, a routine error in an automated system, the kind of thing that resolves itself half the time, he could not leave it alone. He got in his car at 2 in the morning. He drove to fix it. He stopped for coffee. He paid with the wrong card. That sequence of decisions from the outside looks like a chain of errors. From the inside, it probably felt like responsibility, like the same discipline and attention that had kept the operation safe for over a year, the same vigilance that had made him careful. And in that moment, the very thing that had protected him, his investment in the system, his refusal to let things slide, his need to maintain control, became the mechanism of his exposure. Investigators brought in behavioral consultants after the arrest to analyze the case structure. What they described was something that appears in nearly every long-running sophisticated fraud case they had studied. A pattern so consistent it has become something close to predictive. The most dangerous moment for an operator running a system like this is not a major crisis. Major crises, paradoxically, tend to be handled calmly by sophisticated operators because they have prepared for them. The most dangerous moment is the near miss, the small alert, the minor error, the manageable disruption. Because near misses don't trigger the prepared response. They trigger the instinctive one. They trigger the part of the human brain that says something is wrong right now and I need to fix it right now, before the reasoning part of the brain has time to calculate whether that instinct serves your actual interests. He had spent over a year developing the discipline to stay away. And then a single, automated error flag, generated in the middle of the night, bypassed 14 months of operational restraint in about 6 minutes. There's a concept in high-stakes security environments, used in contexts ranging from nuclear facility protocol to intelligence operations, called the minimum necessary contact principle. The idea is that the longer a system can run without direct human intervention, the safer it is from exposure. Not because the system is infallible, but because every instance of human contact with a sensitive system is a potential leak point. Every login is a trace. Every access is an event. Every moment of intervention is a moment of visibility. The principle doesn't say never touch it. It says touch it only when not touching it would cause more damage than the trace. The question the forensic consultants were left with, and it's a question that doesn't have a clean answer, is whether the defendant understood this principle and violated it anyway, or whether he understood it perfectly and made a judgment call that turned out to be wrong. Because in the moment, the error probably looked consequential. At 2 a.m. sitting in the dark, watching a notification about a failed automated transfer in a control layer account, the calculus probably felt real and immediate. If this fails to clear and something downstream breaks, the pattern changes. The pattern change generates more flags. The flags generate more scrutiny. Better to fix it now. Better to keep everything smooth and invisible. The logic was not irrational. It was the logic of a careful person. It was the logic that had gotten him to 14 months without being caught. And it was the same logic that sent him to a gas station at 2:17 in the morning. What the case reveals, and this is the part that should sit with you, is that the most sophisticated fraud protections in the world cannot fully protect against the operator's own instincts. You can build layers of legal insulation. You can automate your exposure. You can route everything through jurisdictions designed to slow investigation. You can be meticulous about your documentation, your devices, your communications, your financial footprint. You can do all of it right for a very long time. And then, at 2 in the morning, a small thing flickers, and the distance you've spent a year building disappears in the time it takes to drive to a gas station. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and 47 minutes. The verdict was not close. But here's what doesn't leave you about this case. even after the verdict, even after the sentencing, even after the case file closes and moves to a federal archive. It's not the scale of the fraud. $40 million is significant, but it's not unprecedented in federal financial crime prosecution. It's not the sophistication of the network, though that was genuinely unusual. What stays with you is the narrowness of the margin. 14 months, $40 million, 23 entities, 6 states, 2 countries providing international legal assistance, a full joint task force with 3 federal agencies. And the difference between this man being convicted and this man walking away clean, the actual delta between those 2 outcomes was one decision made by one person at 2 in the morning. Don't go. Let it sit. Wait until morning. The error clears itself half the time. And even if it doesn't, you fix it at 9 a.m. from somewhere that isn't traceable to a gas station on Morris Road, and no jury ever hears about any of it. That was the choice, and it was a completely understandable choice to make the wrong way. The consultants said it clearly. The majority of people in that position, with that investment, with that level of personal connection to the system they'd built, the majority of people get in the car, because that's what it means to care about something. That's what vigilance looks like from the inside. And the irony, the thing that makes this case genuinely disturbing rather than simply instructive, is that the quality that destroyed him was not a weakness. It was, in almost every other context, a strength. The attention, the care, the unwillingness to leave something broken overnight. He was caught not by failure, but by conscientiousness. Not by sloppiness, but by precision applied at the wrong moment, in the wrong direction. There is a final detail about this case that the investigators who worked it tend to mention when they discuss it. Not in official reports, in conversations. The coffee at the gas station was black, no sugar. They noted it in the surveillance log, and not because it was evidentiary, but because it was humanizing in a way that the rest of the case wasn't. This man, who had built $40 million of hidden infrastructure across 3 countries, who had spent over a year operating under a level of discipline that most people could not sustain for a week. He drove out in the middle of the night, fixed his system in 4 minutes, and bought a black coffee on the way home. Like anyone would. Like any person who'd been woken up at 2 a.m. by a problem they needed to solve. A completely ordinary moment, inside an extraordinary deception. That's the gap this case keeps pointing back to. Not between the criminal and everyone else, but between the extraordinary thing a person can build and the absolutely ordinary human thing that undoes it. The surveillance footage doesn't show a mastermind being exposed. It shows a tired person at a gas station in the dark. And that image, more than the verdict, more than the sentence, more than the $40 million and the 11 counts, is what makes this case the kind of thing you keep thinking about after it's over. Because the real question isn't how he got caught. The real question is how many people, in how many situations far less dramatic than this, make the same kind of decision every day. The decision to touch something they should leave alone. To fix something at the wrong time, in the wrong way. Because the alternative, leaving it alone, trusting the system, accepting the small loss of control, feels psychologically intolerable. We build elaborate structures to protect ourselves from risk. And then we walk into the one gap those structures cannot close, because that gap is us. It's the part of the brain that acts before it calculates. The part that says, go now, not wait. He almost made it. And that is the most important sentence in this entire case. Not that he was caught, not that justice was served, though it was, but that he almost made it. That the system he built was genuinely close to sufficient. That the investigation, 47 agents, 14 months, 3 countries, one of the most resource-intensive financial crime task forces assembled in that region in a decade, was within a single human decision of coming up empty. One alert, one car trip, one coffee, and the whole thing came down. Think about that the next time something wakes you up at 2 a.m. that probably could have waited until morning. Think about what the careful version of you would do, and then think about what the human version of you would actually do. Most people get in the car. That's what makes this dangerous. That's what makes it real. And that's why, long after the verdict was read and the courtroom emptied and the case file was archived, the investigators who worked it still talk about it. Not because of how it ended, because of how close it came to ending differently. And somewhere in a federal facility, a man is probably thinking about a gas station on Morse Road and a $14 receipt, and all the distance between who he almost was and who he became, measured in 2 minutes and one wrong card.